It is an extremely difficult contract that was agreed to by Stephen Harper and the previous Conservative government. Part of the terms of that contract agreed to was total confidentiality around that contract. So I cannot give details at this point of what is in the contract. Suffice it to say, possible penalties would be in the billions of dollars, but that is something we are looking at right now.
So what do we know about the Saudi arms deal itself? Take a listen. The deal to sell light armored vehicles to the Saudis was struck in February of 2014. Here's what Canada sold the kingdom: 924 LAV 6s, essentially the most modern light armored vehicles. Of those, 354 are standard troop carriers, 119 of the vehicles are the heavy assault type, 119 are anti-tank vehicles, and another 119 are designated as direct fire support. The remaining vehicles supplied by General Dynamics include ambulances, mobile command posts, VIP transports, and recovery vehicles equipped with cranes. The deal was signed by the former Conservative government, but export permits, which allow the vehicles to be shipped out of Canada, were first signed by the current Liberal government back in April of 2016.
Our government will not weaken the credibility of the signature of the Government of Canada.
What would be involved in cancelling the Saudi arms deal, and how might cancelling the deal affect Canada's defence industry? Dave Perry is Vice President and a Senior Analyst at the Canadian Global Affairs Institute. Hey, Dave, nice to see you again.
Thanks.
So the Prime Minister is facing calls, obviously, to cancel, quote unquote, or freeze exports when it comes to the Saudi LAV deal. What are the implications of that?
So there's a couple of different implications, both directly for the deal and for the wider defense industry. So important context here is that it's an actual contract between the Government of Canada and Saudi Arabia, and then the Government of Canada has a subcontract with General Dynamics to provide the vehicles. So it would be Canada that would be on the hook for any penalties associated with the deal if it's canceled, and it would be Canada that would be liable to paying General Dynamics if for any work that hasn't been paid for already, or being responsible for anything that's a problem in terms of the payments between Saudi Arabia and Canada, and therefore General Dynamics. And the other, I think, context here is that so far we haven't seen anything that would actually materially affect the conditions of the export permits specifically.
And what are those conditions?
So basically, there's a review to look at whether or not there are human rights implications of the actual export in question. And so all of these things that have happened with the Saudi journalist, which have been terrible, have had no connection with light armored vehicles. And so the way that the export review, which is done rigorously, it looks to see whether or not there's an issue with the light armored vehicles, which there's been zero implications related to this Saudi journalist's killing. And so if they made a change based on the optics of the journalist's death related to this export contract, it would basically be a change in the rules after signing the contract. And I think that would be significantly impactful in a negative way to the Canadian defense industry.
Why to the defense industry,
more
largely?
The defense industry is quite heavily reliant on exports, and those exports are reliable upon an export control regime which is viewed to be predictable. So a lot of the companies...
Can you explain that in layman's terms?
Yeah, so basically you have General Dynamics, which is owned by an American parent company. And so they have manufacturing facilities in London, Ontario, and they have several in lots of other places in the United States. And so they want to be able to have certainty of what the rules are, that if they follow them and behave legally, that they can get an export permit for what is known to be a country where they can do those exports in a predictable manner. And so if the parent company loses confidence that Canada's regime is going to have predictability, if the Government of Canada seemed to have changed the rules because of some bad things happening in public pressure on Twitter, but which are unrelated to the actual export in question, then General Dynamics may decide to move the plan.
I would challenge the notion, though, that it's just pressure on Twitter. I mean, this is, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like this,
no, absolutely.
And to be fair, the pressure has existed. I mean, we've talked about this story many times over the last few years. This is not just because of Khashoggi. There's a war in Yemen. There's a lot of other. So I wonder, is it even, is there a different set of constraints or considerations when you're talking about predictability with such an unpredictable buyer?
So I think the thing that has been predictable is the way that at least the Government of Canada's assessment about the way the Saudi government has used the light armored vehicles made by General Dynamics. which they have been buying and using for several decades now. And even though there have been other issues that have come up in Yemen and the eastern part of Saudi Arabia, none of them have been shown to have a connection specifically with these exports. And
although those investigations are never made public, right?
Right.
But that's what they conclude,
right.
to be fair. Okay.
Exactly.
And so when you talk about, I guess, the broader implications for the defense industry at large, you sort of highlighted, but predictability is really important. And what can you quantify sort of what's at stake for, how big is that industry in Canada? So
the ISED statistics on the website would show that there's $6 billion in GDP, $10 billion in sales, almost 30,000 direct jobs, and then 60,000 jobs writ large associated with the industry. And so those all wouldn't necessarily immediately go away if there's a cancellation of this permit. But if you start to introduce uncertainty into the minds of the corporate boards that make decisions about whether or not to open a plant in, say, London or Michigan, that could potentially lead to some of this work leaving the country.
We're not the only country facing this kind of question right now. Many of our G7 allies are, with a wide variety of responses. Strategically, what are some of the considerations that they are having to take into account?
So I think the basic bottom line here is that the Saudis have lots of money and they have lots of desire to buy weapons, and there are multiple people that will sell them to them. So they can buy those weapons from Canada, they can buy them from other members of the G7. If we all decided collectively to stop selling them to them, I think it's simplistic to think that the Saudis will simply go unarmed. They will find other markets, probably from Russia, maybe China, where they can buy light armored vehicles or other technology.
And so what do you do?
Well, I think that what the government's probably looking at, a number of different ways that they can convey that they're unhappy with Saudi behavior. But I think that what they should be looking at are ways that they can do that where they'll have more chance of influencing what the Saudis do. And if the government takes the view that they want to punish in some way the Saudis, to find a mechanism that will punish them more than they will potentially Canadians working in the defense industry at home.
And when it comes to the one thing that is interesting to me is also how you go about this. So I don't know if everybody understands, and I certainly didn't, fully. But this whole idea of you can't cancel the whole thing, but export permits are issued, and how are they issued basically, and the government has to sign off on them, and so that's what they mean when they say freeze.
Right. So basically, a lot of these deals are gated. So it's not just we sign one contract and then you're off for the next 11 years and multiple billions of dollars. So I think, given some of the reporting that Murray Brewster has done before about this deal, it's got multiple different components. So initial sales, follow-on sales, earlier design work, follow-on support. So each one of those chunks could potentially have a separate permit involved in them. So potentially, now that they're into the phase where they've actually delivered some of these, they would need to go and get another set of permits to deliver the next batch or deliver some of the maintenance. We don't really know, but I think the way that it's set up, there's multiple different points in time where this deal has required an export permit, not just it's one and done and then you come back later.
And is it peculiar or odd or unique at all that it is totally confidential? I mean, a lot politically has been made about that this week. This government is pointing its finger at the last government for agreeing to keep the terms of the deal confidential. Are deals like this, arms deals of this nature, usually like that?
I think the easiest way to answer that is to say that there really aren't many other deals like this that are this big, that have been this high profile. So there could well be hundreds of other ones that we just generally don't sell because of the nature of our market, things that are fully completed systems like this that attract a lot of attention.
Mostly we sell parts that...
Right, the way that our industry is set up, we sell parts, we sell systems, we sell sub-assemblies, we don't sell what are effectively finished products.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate your time.